The mountains of Blackwood had always been a place of silence, a kind of silence that presses against your chest, where even the sound of your own breath feels like an intrusion. That night, the silence was broken. The storm came down from the peaks like a beast. Snow lashed sideways in sheets of white. The wind screamed through the trees, and the forest floor vanished under drifts that deepened by the hour. It wasn't just a winter storm. It was the kind of storm that decided whether you made it through the night or became part of the mountain's frozen graveyard. Inside a small cabin tucked against a ridge, Ethan Cross was fighting with himself. He had enough wood to last until morning, but not for another day. And in a storm like this, there was no room for tomorrow's gamble. He pulled on his heavy coat, strapped on snowshoes, and grabbed his axe. The door groaned open, and the storm punched him in the face like an old enemy. Ethan wasn't afraid of storms. He'd survived worse, both in deserts far away and in jungles that never forgot your scent. But there was something about these mountains, a raw, merciless truth that reminded him of the battlefield, here, just like there. Nature didn't care who you were or what you carried in your past. He bent his head against the wind, pushing deeper into the tree line. Each step crunched, muffled by snow. His mind wandered, as it always did, back to the faces he tried to forget. Men he'd once called brothers, men who died because someone had turned their back on them. He shook the thought away and focused on the simple rhythm of the task. Find wood, split wood, carry wood. That was his life now. Simple, safe. But the mountains weren't safe tonight. Ethan stopped mid-there. Through the white haze of the blizzard something didn't belong. At first he thought it was a fallen tree branch, but then the shape twitched to hand. He pushed forward, snow burning his face, heart suddenly thudding harder than it had in months. He knelt down, brushing snow away with his gloves, and the truth hit him like a strike to the chest. A man half bare, arms tied behind his back, face pale as death. The snow was already reclaiming him, ice creeping into his beard, lips cracked and blue. Next to him lay another shape, trembling faintly under the frost. A dog. Ethan ripped away more snow. The dog's ears twitched, a weak growl in its throat, but it didn't have the strength to rise. Its body shook with the last reserves of life, ribs rising in shallow breaths. The man's eyes fluttered, trying to open. He was still alive. Ethan's gut twisted. Every instinct told him to walk away. Don't do it, Cross. Not your fight. Not again. He stood in the storm, torn in half. His breath came in clouds of white. Memories bled into the present. The last time he'd rushed in. The last time he'd chosen to help. And the bodies that had followed. He'd promised himself no more. No more wars. No more saving people who would only drag him back into hell. The wind howled around him. The snow stung his face like needles. He looked down again. The man's lips barely moved, whispering something lost to the storm. The dog whimpered, eyes locking onto Ethan's with a plea beyond words. He could walk away, pretend he never saw them, go back to the cabin, shut the door, feed the fire. Alone, safe, forgotten. But that's not who he was. Not really. The soldier inside him, the one he had buried under years of silence, was screaming now. Orders he could never unlearn. Leave no one behind. Ethan cursed under his breath. He dropped his axe, knelt, and pulled the man up by the shoulders. The weight was dead, a body that didn't want to fight anymore. He threw the man over his shoulder, then crouched for the dog. The animal tried to growl again, but Ethan shoved it under his coat against his chest. Its heartbeat was faint but still there. The storm clawed at him as he turned back toward the cabin. Each step was agony, snow dragging him down, lungs burning from the cold. But he didn't stop. He couldn't, not now. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The cabin light finally appeared through the swirling white, a single glow against the darkness. Ethan staggered to the door, kicked it open, and stumbled inside. He lowered the man onto a cot, set the dog by the fire, and slammed the door against the storm's fury. The cabin filled with the sound of labored breathing, the strangers, the dogs, and Ethan's own. For the first time in years, Ethan wasn't alone, and he hated how much that terrified him. He dropped into the chair by the fire, staring at the two lives he'd just pulled from death's grip, his fists clenched, his chest tight with the weight of choices he thought he'd buried forever. This storm wasn't just outside anymore. It had come into his cabin, into his silence, and into the very heart he'd sworn to keep frozen. And Ethan Cross knew deep down that his life would never be the same.
Ethan shoved the old wooden door open with his shoulder, fighting the rush of wind and snow that tried to follow him inside. He dragged the half-conscious body of Marcus with one arm and motioned for the dog to come in with the other. The German shepherd hesitated on the threshold, his eyes locked on the stranger, body tense, a low growl vibrating in his chest. Only when Marcus collapsed onto the floor did the dog finally step inside, never taking his gaze off Ethan. The cabin was small, but compared to the storm outside, it felt like another world. A cast-iron stove glowed with orange light, heat radiating into the room. Shadows flickered across the rough-hewn walls. Ethan lowered Marcus onto an old rug near the stove, close enough for the warmth to reach him. "Another 10 minutes out there and you'd be ice," Ethan muttered, mostly to himself. He grabbed a battered first aid kit from a shelf. His hands moved with muscle memory, years of patching up men under worse conditions. He worked quickly, cutting away the stiff, frozen fabric around Marcus's arm. The wound was caked with dried blood and snow. Ethan cleaned it carefully, then wrapped it with fresh bandages. Through it all, the dog stood a few feet away, hackles raised, nose twitching at every movement. When Ethan glanced up, the animal's eyes were sharp, calculating. "Easy, boy," Ethan said quietly, his voice steady. "I'm not hurting him. We both want him alive, right?" The dog's growl faded, but suspicion stayed in his eyes. He lay down next to Marcus, head flat on the floor, still watching. Nearly an hour passed before Marcus stirred. His breathing grew heavier, his body twitching as warmth seeped back into him. Ethan poured a bit of warm water into a tin cup and pressed it lightly against Marcus's lips. The man groaned, trying to push himself up, but his strength was gone. "Don't force it," Ethan said. "You're safe here. No one's coming through that door but me." Marcus blinked, his eyes cloudy, as soon as he made out Ethan's face. Instinct kicked in. He jerked upward, half ready to fight, then froze when he realized he had no weapon, no strength. "Who the hell are you?" His voice cracked, rough with cold. Ethan didn't move closer. He kept his hands open. "Visible names, Ethan. I live out here. When found you and your partner in the snow. If I hadn't, you'd be gone by now." Marcus stared hard, suspicion written all over him. Trust didn't come easy, especially not when your last memory was being attacked and left for dead. But the bandages on his arm, the fire, and the steady breathing of his dog at his side were proof enough that this man hadn't finished what others had started. The dog sniffed Marcus's hand, then licked it once, as if to reassure him. For the first time since they came in, his body relaxed slightly. Ethan picked up a heavy wool blanket and set it over Marcus's shoulders. "Rest. You'll need strength. The storm's not letting up anytime soon." Marcus didn't answer. His eyes stayed half open, scanning the cabin, scanning Ethan, even as exhaustion dragged him under. The weariness in him didn't fade. The dog kept watch, lying close enough to feel Marcus's heartbeat, gaze never straying far from the man who had taken them in. Ethan settled into a rocking chair by the stove, tossing another log onto the fire. Sparks popped and hissed, filling the silence. Outside, the storm screamed against the walls. But inside the cabin, the air was steady and warm. Ethan leaned back, eyes half closed. He knew, the moment he'd opened that door and carried these two inside, that his quiet life in the mountains was over. Strangers carried weight, and this man in particular wounded hunted, where he was going to drag old ghosts into the light. But as Ethan glanced at the shepherd's steady eyes and Marcus's stubborn fight to stay conscious, he felt something he hadn't in years, a sense that maybe he'd done the right thing. The storm hadn't eased by morning. Snow piled against the windows, and the wind screamed through the pines like a warning that no one was going anywhere. Ethan fed the fire and poured hot water into a dented kettle. The smell of pine smoke filled the cabin. Marcus sat propped against the wall, blanket around his shoulders. His skin still looked pale, but his eyes were clearer now. Shadow stayed pressed against his side, like a silent guardian. "You don't look like the type who asks questions," Marcus said hoarsely, breaking the silence. "I'm not," Ethan replied. He handed over a mug of warm water. "But I figure you'll talk when you're ready." Marcus studied him for a moment, then nodded. His voice carried both exhaustion and weight. "I'm a detective, Portland PD. I was running an investigation, illegal weapons moving through the state. Not small-time stuff. Military-grade rifles, explosives, the kind of cargo that gets people killed fast." Ethan leaned back in his chair, jaw tightening. He didn't like where this was headed. "We tracked them into the Blackwood Range," Marcus continued. "I thought we had the upper hand. Instead, they were waiting for us. Ambush. My team scattered. I don't know who made it out. All I had was Shadow. We ran, but they caught us before we could reach the road. Guess they figured leaving us in the storm was easier than pulling the trigger." Shadow's ears twitched at the sound of his name. He lifted his head, eyes flicking between the two men. Ethan's gaze shifted from the fire to the dog, and him. "Where does he fit into this?" Marcus's hand dropped onto Shadow's back. "He's not just a canine. He saw everything. He can identify scents, people, vehicles. Without him, The case dies with him. We can take them down. For a long moment, Ethan said nothing. He rubbed a hand across his face, staring at the fire. The words military-grade weapons rattled inside his chest. Images from years ago tried to push their way to the surface. Smoke, the sound of gunfire echoing through ruined streets, friends who never made it home, trust broken by people who should have had his back. "No," Ethan said finally, his voice low but firm. "This isn't my fight. I've had enough of that world. Whatever war you're in, you'll fight it without me." Marcus didn't argue, but his eyes carried something heavier than suspicion now. Disappointment, maybe even a trace of desperation. "I don't blame you," Marcus said quietly. "You've built a life out here, away from it all. I can see that. But those men, they're not stopping. They'll keep running guns, keep killing, until someone forces them down. If not me, then who?" The words struck harder than Ethan wanted to admit. He turned his head away, pretending to check the fire, but really to hide the shadow that crossed his face in the silence that followed. Ethan heard not just the storm outside, but the voices of his past, the radio chatter, the shouts, the final cries of men he'd led into battles that went wrong. He'd buried those memories deep, but Marcus's story had cracked them open again. Shadow rested his head on Marcus's lap, eyes closing. The dog looked peaceful, but Ethan knew better. That animal had fought to stay alive in the storm, same as its handler. It would fight again, if it had to. Ethan poured himself another cup of hot water, hands steady despite the storm raging inside him. He didn't look at Marcus when he spoke. "You rest. When the storm clears, you head back to Portland. Take your evidence, take your dog, take your fight. But don't ask me to join you. That's not who I am anymore." Marcus didn't answer. His silence said enough. Ethan stared into the flames, but the fire didn't bring peace. It only lit up the ghosts that had come to sit with him again. That night, after Marcus drifted into an uneasy sleep, Ethan sat alone by the fire. The storm outside was losing strength, but inside the cabin, another kind of storm had taken hold. He tried to focus on the crackle of the logs, the steady rhythm of the flames, but the fire didn't soothe him. It pulled him backward, into places he had buried deep. The desert heat came first, the smell of smoke and sand. He saw his unit moving through a ruined street, boots crunching over broken glass. They'd been told the alley was clear, told by someone they trusted. But the ambush had come fast, too fast. Gunfire erupted from the rooftops, and in the first seconds, 3 men were already down. Ethan could still hear their voices. One of them, Carter, had shouted his name, a look of shock frozen on his face before he fell. They'd walked into it blind, because someone on the inside had betrayed them. The mission collapsed. The team was torn apart, and Ethan, their leader, carried the guilt of bringing them there. He pressed a hand against his forehead, trying to push the images away. Years in the mountains, years of silence, were supposed to bury those ghosts. But Marcus's words about ambushes, weapons, men who wouldn't stop, they had dragged the memories right back into the room. Shadow shifted on the floor beside Marcus, the dog's ears twitching in his sleep. For a moment, Ethan envied the animal's peace. Dogs didn't wrestle with questions of betrayal or guilt. They just gave everything they had, no matter the cost. Ethan poured himself a cup of water, though his hands shook slightly. He knew what Marcus wanted: help, a partner, someone who could fight alongside him. Ethan also knew what that meant: stepping back into a world of bullets, lies, and blood. And with that world came the voices of the dead, asking why he survived when they hadn't. He stared at the fire, weighing the choice like a man holding a blade to his own throat. On one side there was solitude, the life he had built here, cutting wood, hunting game, fixing the cabin when it broke, quiet days, quiet nights. No one to betray him, no one to lose. On the other side, there was Marcus, a man barely clinging to life, still willing to stand against people who had nearly killed him. And the dog, Shadow, loyal to the end, carrying a case that could stop more blood from spilling. Ethan let out a long breath. He didn't want to care. Caring meant risk, and risk meant pain. He had sworn, after that mission, that he was done with causes, done with battles that weren't his. But the ghosts didn't care about his promises. They sat in the corners of the cabin, shadows flickering with every crack to the fire, whispering his failures. Ethan knew that ignoring Marcus wouldn't make them leave. If anything, it would only make them louder. The hours dragged by. Marcus slept, Shadow slept, but Ethan stayed awake, trapped between the life he wanted to keep and the life he had sworn never to return to. When the fire burned low, he finally stood and pulled a blanket tighter around his shoulders. He looked once more at Marcus, at Shadow, and then at the window where the storm had begun to clear. The war outside might have ended years ago, but inside, his war was just beginning again.
By morning, the storm had passed. The snow outside lay heavy and untouched. The mountains blanketed in silence. Inside the cabin, the fire burned low, filling the air with the faint scent of smoke and pine. Marcus was awake. He sat near the stove, blankets still wrapped around his shoulders, Shadow at his side. His face was pale, but his eyes had sharpened overnight. He looked less like a man clinging to survival and more like a man staring at a cliff he knew he had to climb. Ethan poured water into a pot, letting it warm slowly. He avoided eye contact. He knew what was coming, Ethan, Marcus said finally, his voice steady but carrying weight. I can't do this alone. I need your help. Ethan didn't answer. He busied himself with the pot, pulling down a tin of coffee grounds, spooning them in like the simple act could drown out the words. Marcus pushed on. You've seen enough to know this isn't just another case. These men, they're organized, armed to the teeth, and they don't leave witnesses. If Shadow and I disappear out here, that's it. The guns keep moving. More people die. The coffee began to bubble. Ethan kept his back to him, staring into the steam. That's not my problem, he said flatly. The hell it isn't, Marcus snapped, sudden fire in his voice. You dragged me out of the snow, patched me up. Why? If you didn't care, you should have left me out there. Ethan turned then, eyes hard. Don't twist this. I pulled you out because I couldn't watch a man freeze to death, not because I want to get dragged into another war. The cabin fell quiet. The only sound was the pop of a log in the stove. Marcus leaned back against the wall, shaking his head. You think hiding out here will keep the past from catching you? I don't know what you've been through, but I can see it in your eyes. You've already fought wars. You've already lost people, and now you're just waiting for what? To die alone in the woods? The words cut deeper than Ethan wanted to admit. He clenched his jaw, turned back to the coffee, and poured it into 2 tin mugs. He handed one to Marcus without a word. Shadow stirred. The dog had been watching the exchange silently, but now he stood, patted across the room, and sat down beside Ethan's chair. He didn't growl. He didn't tense. He simply lowered himself onto the floor, head resting near Ethan's boot. Ethan froze. He looked down at the shepherd, at the quiet trust in its eyes. It wasn't a trick, wasn't training, it was instinct. The dog had chosen. Marcus noticed a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. He doesn't do that with just anyone. He trusts you. Ethan stared into the fire. The memories of his fallen team pressed at him again. Sharp and merciless, men who had trusted him, followed him, and paid the price for it. He'd sworn never to let anyone put that kind of faith in him again. And yet, here was this dog, this detective, both looking to him like he was the only thing standing between them and the dark. He exhaled slowly, setting his mug down. You don't know what you're asking, he said finally. The kind of help you need, it doesn't come without blood. Marcus met his gaze. I know, I've already bled for this. I'll bleed again if I have to. But if I go alone, I don't make it back. And Shadow dies with me. He paused. If you come, maybe we both live. Maybe more people live. The silence stretched. The fire crackled. The snow shifted outside. And Shadow's breathing was the only steady sound between them. Ethan's shoulders slumped. He hated the truth in Marcus's words, hated the ghosts in his own head even more. But deep down, he knew he was standing at a crossroads. One path led back into solitude, into the slow suffocation of guilt. The other led into danger, into the very world he had sworn to abandon, but maybe also into redemption. He reached down, resting a hand lightly on Shadow's fur. The dog didn't flinch, didn't move. He just stayed, calm and steady, like he belonged there. Ethan looked up at Marcus. His voice was quiet, resigned, but unshakable. All right, I'll help you. But once this is over, you and the dog are out of my life. Understood? Relief washed over Marcus's face, though he masked it quickly. Understood. That's all I need. Ethan leaned back, staring into the flames. The decision was made. The ghosts in his head had won, or maybe, for the first time in years, he had finally stopped running from them. The cabin was quiet, except for the pop of firewood and the low whistle of wind pressing against the shutters. Ethan sat at the small wooden table, his hand spread across a weathered map of the Blackwood Mountains. The map had yellowed with age, creases running through it like scars, but it was detailed enough to be useful. He traced a finger along the ridgelines, valleys, and hidden passes, his soldier's mind already calculating choke points and vantage spots. Marcus leaned in from across the table, his body still stiff from his injuries but his eyes sharp. They won't give up, he said, voice low. If they lose me, they lose everything. And Shadow, he glanced at the dog lying on the floor. She saw them. That makes her just as dangerous to them as I am. Shadow's ears twitched at the sound of her name. She lifted her head, golden eyes catching the firelight, then slowly rested her chin back on her paws. Ethan studied Marcus for a moment. The man was banged up, but there was a determination in him that couldn't be ignored. Still, Ethan kept his tone flat. "You said there are 6 men. At least," Marcus replied. "Maybe more. They're part of a larger smuggling ring. Money, sometimes worse. The group I was tracking split off, holed up near the river fork on the north side. They've got supplies, weapons, and no reason to leave until they finish the job." Ethan's jaw tightened. He tapped the north ridge on the map. "This area's dense, steep cliffs, narrow passes. They'll expect anyone coming from the south, not the high ground." Marcus gave a small nod. "So you're thinking flanking them?" "I'm thinking survival," Ethan corrected. "The terrain here is our only advantage. They know how to fight. We don't walk into this blind." The 2 men studied the map in silence, the firelight flickering over their faces. Ethan's military instincts were kicking in whether he wanted them to or not. Every detail mattered: the weather, the terrain, the psychology of the enemy. It was like slipping into a role he had abandoned years ago, one he swore he'd never play again. Shadow suddenly stood, ears perked, nose twitching. She padded over to the door, sniffed, then gave a soft alert bark. Ethan followed her movement carefully. She wasn't restless. She'd caught something. He grabbed his coat, opened the door, and stepped into the snow. The storm had eased. The forest beyond the clearing was blanketed in white. Shadows deep beneath the pines. Ethan crouched, scanning for tracks. Sure enough, Shadow trotted to the edge of the tree line and sniffed at a faint trail barely visible in the moonlight. Human tracks, partly covered by snow, old enough that they weren't from tonight, but fresh enough to confirm Marcus's words. Others had passed through here. Ethan returned inside, brushing snow off his shoulders. "They've been close. Within a day's walk." Marcus's expression darkened. "Then we don't have much time." Ethan stared down at the map again, the weight of choice pressing against his chest. This wasn't his fight. Not really. But if those men were bold enough to get this close, hiding wouldn't save him. Sooner or later they'd find the cabin. He pointed at a narrow ravine marked in faded ink. "If we move through here, we can circle wide without being spotted. The cliffs give us cover. Shadow can track their movement better than we can." At the mention of her name, Shadow wagged her tail, padding back to Ethan's side. She pressed against his leg in quiet solidarity, as if she understood she was part of the plan now. Marcus exhaled, almost a laugh but too heavy to be called relief. "So that's it then. We're a team." Ethan didn't answer right away. He looked from Marcus to the dog, then back at the map. The soldier in him knew the truth teams meant trust, and trust was what had gotten men killed before. But staring at Shadow's steady eyes and Marcus's battered determination, he realized the decision had already been made. "Yeah," Ethan said finally, voice low but certain. "We're a team." The 3 of them sat in that fragile moment of agreement, bound together not by choice but by necessity. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the cabin's walls like a warning. Ethan leaned forward, running his finger across the map one more time. "We move at first light. No noise, no hesitation. If we're going to survive this, we have to be sharper than they are. The mountain will be on our side if we use it right." Marcus nodded, his hand tightening into a fist. "I'll tell you everything I know. Names, habits, where they stash their gear. We'll find the weak point." Shadow let out a short, eager whine, tail thumping softly against the floorboards. She was ready. Ethan gave her a rare faint smile before turning serious again. He folded the map with practiced precision, the way a soldier folds orders before heading into battle. The sound of the paper snapping shut filled the cabin like a final decision. Tomorrow, they wouldn't just be survivors, they'd be hunters. The morning broke gray and bitterly cold. The forest was still, as if even the birds had chosen to stay silent. Ethan led the way, his boots crunching over the snowpack. Every step was measured, careful, leaving only the faintest trace behind. Marcus followed close, his breath ragged in the freezing air but steadier than the night before. Shadow padded ahead, nose low, tail rigid, her body language sharp with focus. The dog stopped every few yards to sniff the ground, her paw pressing into faint depressions in the snow. Human tracks partly iced over, but recent. Ethan crouched, brushing a gloved hand across one. 3 men, maybe 4, he murmured. Moving light, no sled, no heavy gear. Scouts. Marcus bent down beside him. "They're close then." Ethan stood, scanning the tree line. The forest pressed in around them, towering pines, thick drifts of snow, silence broken only by the wind whistling through the branches. He had patrolled terrain like this before, Only back then he'd worn a uniform and carried orders. Now there was no chain of command, just instinct. They pressed deeper into the woods, Shadow guiding them like a compass. Twice she stopped, ears flicking, before moving forward again. Her body tensed with every faint sound, breaking ice, distant creak of wood under snow. Ethan trusted her senses more than his own. By midday, the tracks led them into a small clearing ringed by dark trees. In the center, half buried under snow, sat a crude camp. A canvas top had been strung between two trees, sagging with ice. Blackened stones marked where a fire had been, and scattered footprints told the story of men who had been there not long ago. Marcus crouched low, studying the ground. They left in a hurry. Ethan nodded. But they'll be back. Camps like this aren't abandoned unless you're spooked or planning to return. Shadow growled softly, nose twitching toward the edge of the clearing. Ethan's eyes followed her line of focus. Movement, a flicker of shadow against snow. His pulse quickened. Down, Ethan hissed. He shoved Marcus behind a snowbank, dropped to one knee, and scanned the tree. Two figures emerged, rifles slung casually over their shoulders, talking in low voices. Smugglers. They hadn't spotted them yet. Marcus's breath came fast, panic flickering across his face. Ethan's expression hardened. This was the moment, the line between being prey and taking control. When the men stepped closer to the abandoned fire pit, Ethan acted. In one fluid motion, he lunged forward, closing the distance like a predator. His shoulder slammed into the first man's chest, sending him crashing to the snow. Before the second could react, Ethan twisted the rifle from his hands, drove an elbow into his jaw, and sent him sprawling. Shadow was on them in an instant, a blur of fur and teeth, snapping close enough to make the fallen men freeze in terror. She didn't bite, but her growl was enough to keep them pinned. Marcus scrambled out from cover. You didn't even quiet," Ethan snapped. He pressed a knee into the chest of the first man, pinning him down. "Who else is out here? Where's your base?" The smuggler spat blood into the snow but said nothing. The second man cursed in a language Marcus recognized, trying to reach for the knife at his belt until Shadow lunged. Teeth bared inches from his throat. He froze, trembling. Ethan's voice was cold steel. "Talk or the dog makes the choice for you." The first man's defiance cracked. "North," he gasped. "River Fork, 2 miles." Ethan's eyes narrowed. He searched the man's face, looking for lies. None came. He gave a curt nod and shoved him back into the snow. "Get up, both of you." Marcus blinked. "You're letting them go." Ethan adjusted the stolen rifle, sliding the strap across his shoulder. "Dead men don't tell stories. Fear does. They'll run back to their boss, and he'll know we're coming. That's fine." Better he's nervous than overconfident. The two smugglers bolted into the trees, stumbling in their haste. Shadow barked once, chasing them just far enough to leave their pride shredded before trotting back to Ethan's side. Marcus exhaled, half in awe, half in disbelief. "You fought like you never left the war." Ethan's jaw tightened, eyes on the direction the men had fled. "I never left it," he muttered. Silence hung between them, thick and heavy. Marcus wanted to press, but the look on Ethan's face told him not to. Instead, he placed a hand on Shadow's back. Steadying himself with her warmth, Ethan pointed toward the north. "The river fork. That's where the real camp is. Tonight, we move closer. No fire, no noise. We watch, we wait, and we choose the ground before they do." Marcus swallowed hard but nodded. "And if they outnumber us?" Ethan finally looked at him, a faint, grim smile tugging at his mouth. "Then we stop thinking like prey and start hunting." Shadow wagged her tail once, as if she understood the shift. The forest seemed to lean in, listening, as the three of them disappeared into the trees, following the trail of snow and blood toward the heart of the danger. The forest grew darker as the day stretched into evening. Snow fell again in quiet flurries, soft enough to hide their tracks but heavy enough to drain their strength. Ethan led the way with steady confidence, reading the land like a language only he knew. Marcus followed, clumsy at times, his city training no match for the rugged terrain. Shadow darted between them, ears pricked, nose constantly searching for scents. After hours of silence broken only by the wind, they stopped at a small outcrop of rock. Ethan gestured for Marcus to sit. "We'll hold here until nightfall," he said. His tone wasn't harsh, but it carried the weight of command. Marcus sank onto the cold stone, rubbing his gloved hands together. "I can't get used to this," he admitted. "No cars, no radios, no backup." Just he looked around at the vast white wilderness. Ethan crouched by a fallen log, pulling a knife from his belt. "This is what kept me alive for years. Out here, everything's an ally if you know how to use it." He sliced bark into thin strips, demonstrating, Birch burns even when it's wet. Remember that Marcus tried to mimic him fumbling with the knife. The bark came off in uneven chunks. Ethan shook his head, then placed his larger hands over Marcus's to guide the motion. Firm, not frantic. Let the blade do the work. For a moment, Marcus felt the surprising steadiness in Ethan's grip. Decisive, practiced, patient. He followed the pressure, and the bark peeled away cleanly. Better, Ethan said, almost approving. You sound like a teacher, Marcus muttered, a half smile on his face. I was never good at teaching, Ethan replied, eyes narrowing at the memory of men who hadn't survived their training. He shifted quickly, pulling a small coil of wire from his pack. Snares, you'll need to know them if this takes longer than expected. Marcus studied the loop Ethan built, his voice low. You really think we'll be out here long enough to trap rabbits? Ethan tied off the wire and set it aside. Plan for the worst, survive the worst. That's how you live. Shadow patted over, nudging Marcus's arm with her nose as if sensing his unease. Her warm breath fogged the air, and Marcus instinctively scratched behind her ear. At least she doesn't think I'm completely useless, he said softly. Ethan watched the interaction, his face unreadable. She trusts you more than I do. That's something. The words stung, though Marcus understood. Trust wasn't free in the middle of danger. It had to be earned. Night fell quickly, wrapping the forest in black. The three huddled near the rocky outcrop. No fire to betray their position. The cold bit deep, and Marcus's teeth chattered uncontrollably. He tried to hide it, but Ethan noticed, without a word. Ethan unrolled an extra layer of canvas and tossed it across Marcus's shoulders. Marcus blinked. Thanks. Don't thank me, Ethan said, eyes scanning the dark tree line. Stay alive. That's enough. The silence stretched until a faint crack echoed through the woods, a branch snapping under weight. Marcus stiffened. Did you hear? Ethan silenced him with a hand gesture. Shadow froze, head low, growl rumbling from her chest. Then, in a blur of motion, a shape lunged from the shadows. One of the smugglers, knife raised, rushing straight at Marcus. Marcus stumbled back, caught completely off guard. But before the blade could strike, Shadow launched herself at the attacker. Her body slammed into the man's arm, teeth snapping close to his wrist. He cried out, dropping the knife into the snow. Ethan moved like lightning, kicking the weapon away and tackling the man to the ground. In seconds, he had the smuggler pinned, his own knife pressed to the man's throat. The intruder gasped, eyes wild. Please, I wasn't gonna wrong lie, Ethan growled. His grip tightened, but he didn't strike. Instead, he yanked the man's pack off his shoulders and shoved him toward the trees. Run back to your friends. Tell them they're not hunting sheep out here. The man bolted into the darkness, limping. Shadow snarled after him but returned to Marcus's side, pressing against his leg as if to check he was unharmed. Marcus dropped to a knee, burying his fingers in her thick fur. You saved me, he whispered, voice trembling. Shadow wagged her tail once and leaned into his touch. Ethan stood over them, silent. His eyes met Marcus's, and for the first time, there wasn't just suspicion there was acknowledgement. You're still alive because of her, Ethan said flatly. Then, softer, don't waste that. Marcus looked up, still stroking the dog's fur. I won't. I know I've been slowing you down, but I'm not going to quit. Not now. The conviction in his voice made Ethan pause. He studied Marcus for a long moment before giving a single nod. Then we keep moving. From now on, we do it as one unit. Shadow barked once, sharp and confident, as if sealing the agreement. The three of them sat in the cold night, no longer just survivors thrown together by chance. Something had shifted. The mistrust had cracked, replaced by a fragile, unspoken alliance. It wasn't friendship yet, but it was the beginning of something stronger. Ethan finally broke the silence. At first light, we head for the river fork. That's where they'll be waiting. You'll need to remember everything I've taught you. Out there, hesitation kills. Marcus straightened, determination burning behind the exhaustion in his eyes. Then I'll learn fast. Shadow rested her head on Ethan's boot, tail thumping softly against the snow. Ethan looked down at her, then back at Marcus. For the first time, the corners of his mouth hinted at a smile. Maybe, he said quietly, this might actually work. Dawn crept over the blackwood in pale streaks of gray. The forest was still, quiet in that eerie way that made even the wind sound like a whisper of warning. Ethan crouched near a thicket of spruce, gloved hands working with practiced precision as he set the last of the snares. Marcus watched, shivering both from the cold and the nerves knotting in his stomach. You really think this is going to work? Ethan didn't look up. He tested the tension on the snare, then brushed snow lightly over the wire until it all but disappeared. It worked before. It'll work again. Men who think they own the woods never look where they're stepping. Marcus rubbed his palms together, trying to steady himself. Back at the academy, we've learned tactics, formations, how to secure a perimeter. But this, he shook his head. This is something else. Out here, Ethan said, finally glancing at him. The forest is the perimeter. Use it right, and it does half the work for you. Shadow circled them restlessly, ears flicking, nose twitching at scents drifting in from deeper in the woods. She gave a low growl and Ethan froze, his eyes sharpened. They're close. Marcus instinctively reached for his sidearm, only to feel Ethan's hand clamp down on his wrist. Not yet. Let them come to us. They retreated into the cover of the trees, crouching behind a fallen log half buried in snow. The woods grew tense. Each sound magnified the creak of branches, the crunch of boots, and then they appeared. 4 men, rifles slung over shoulders, trudging through the snow with careless confidence. Marcus's breath hitched. 4 of them, he whispered. 3 in a minute, Ethan muttered. The lead smuggler stepped directly onto the hidden snare. In an instant, the wire snapped tight around his ankle, yanking him off his feet. He hit the ground hard, shouting in shock as the other 3 spun around in confusion. Now, Ethan said. He vaulted from cover with startling speed, slamming into the nearest man before the smuggler could raise his rifle. The impact drove them both into the snow. Ethan rolled, ripped the gun free, and sent a brutal elbow into the man's temple. Marcus fired his weapon into the air, a sharp crack that sent the other to scattering. One bolted to the left, but Shadow was already there, launching out of the trees like a streak of muscle and teeth. She latched onto the man's arm, pulling him down with a scream. The last smuggler raised his weapon, but Marcus steadied his aim, finger tight on the trigger. His voice cut through the chaos. Drop it now. For a tense second the man hesitated, gun wavering. Then Ethan appeared at his side, pressing the stolen rifle into the man's back. He said, drop it. The smuggler obeyed, the weapon clattering into the snow. Shadow snarled, keeping her grip just threatening enough to freeze the man she had pinned. The fight was over in less than a minute. 4 men entered the trap. Now 3 lay groaning in the snow, and 1 hung suspended by his ankle in the snare. Cursing in pain, Marcus's chest heaved, adrenaline surging through his veins. We actually did it. Ethan gave a curt nod, already tying the hands of the captured men with rough cord. This wasn't the hard part. This was the warm-up. Marcus knelt beside the one caught in the snare, now dragged down and pinned. Tell us where your boss is. Where's the camp? The man spat defiantly. You'll be dead before you get close. Ethan crouched, eyes cold and unreadable. You've got a choice. Walk out of these woods with all your fingers, or stay here for the wolves to find. Which sounds better? Shadow growled at just the right moment, her teeth glinting white in the dim light. The prisoner flinched, fear cracking his bravado. The camp, he stammered. Northridge, near the river fork. They built it into the rocks. You can't miss it. The boss is there. Ethan leaned back, studying him. Name, Valdez, the man blurted. Hector Valdez. Marcus felt a chill colder than the snow seep into his bones. He'd heard that name whispered in reports, a trafficker who vanished years ago, rumored to be dead or overseas. If he was here, running operations out of Blackwood, then the threat was bigger than either of them imagined. Ethan tied the man tighter and shoved him against a tree. We've got what we need, Marcus frowned. And them, what if they come after us? They'll be too busy digging themselves out of fear. Ethan said flatly. The message is sent. Their camp won't feel as safe tonight. He shouldered his rifle, eyes scanning north. The forest stretched, dark and endless, hiding answers in its shadows. Marcus rose beside him, Shadow pressing close to his leg, steady and alert. Ethan's voice cut through the stillness. Next stop the ridge. That's where this ends. Marcus nodded, determination hardening in his chest. The fear was still there, but so was something else. Resolve. For the first time he felt like part of a real team. Shadow gave a sharp bark, as if agreeing, before bounding ahead to lead the way. The trap had worked, but it was only the beginning. The true fight waited in the heart of the Blackwood, and all 3 of them knew it. The forest thinned as they approached the ridge. From their vantage point, Ethan, Marcus, and Shadow peered down at a cluster of structures half hidden by rock outcroppings and thick stands of pine. Smoke curled faintly from a chimney, disappearing quickly into the cold air. The stronghold wasn't just a camp, it was fortified, dug into the land as though its builders intended to stay. Marcus raised his binoculars, scanning the area. Armed men patrolled the perimeter, rifles slung casually but ready. Trucks were parked near a clearing, their tires half buried in snow. A generator thumped softly in the distance, carrying through the stillness. Then Marcus froze. His hands tightened on the binoculars, and a curse slipped through his teeth. "What is it?" Ethan asked, keeping his voice low. Marcus lowered the binoculars. His face pale, he hesitated, then forced the words out. "The man running this, it's not just some trafficker. It's called Maddox." The name hit Ethan like a physical blow. His stomach twisted, air catching in his throat. Maddox, the ghost from his past, the traitor who had sold out his unit overseas. The reason men Ethan had called brothers were buried in flag-draped coffins. "No," Ethan muttered, shaking his head. "That's not possible. He's dead. He had to be." Marcus's gaze was steady, though his voice trembled. "I'm telling you, it's him. I've seen his file. Ethan Maddox disappeared years ago. Looks like he's been building this empire right under everyone's nose." Shadow let out a low growl. Sensing Ethan's sudden spiral, Ethan pulled back from the ridge, pacing in the snow. His breaths came fast, sharp, his vision tunneled. Memories crashing down, gunfire in the desert, blood in the sand, voices on the coms pleading for backup that never came. And then Maddox's voice, smooth, calm, leading them into a slaughter. Ethan slammed his fist into a tree trunk, bark cracking under the force. "I can't do this." His voice was raw, breaking. "I thought the past was buried. But him, out here, it's like it followed me into the woods." Marcus stepped toward him cautiously. "That's exactly why we can't walk away. Maddox destroyed your team. He'll do the same here, unless we stop him." But Ethan shook his head violently. "You don't understand. He broke me once. I barely crawled out alive. And if I go back in there," his voice dropped to a whisper, "maybe I don't crawl out at all." The silence between them was heavy, broken only by the distant hum of the generator. Marcus wanted to argue, to push, but Ethan's eyes told him this wasn't just fear of failure, it was fear of reliving the worst kind of betrayal. Marcus clenched his fists. "Listen to me. You saved me and Shadow out there in the snow. You've kept us alive every step since. If you give up now, Maddox wins again without firing a shot." Ethan stared off into the trees, jaw tight, his hands trembled slightly, something Marcus had never seen before. He wasn't just the stoic survivalist anymore. He was a man staring into the eyes of his deepest wound. Shadow moved closer, pressing her body against Ethan's leg, warm and grounding. Her soft whine cut through the spiral, pulling his gaze downward. For a moment, Ethan rested a hand on her head, steadying himself on the one creature that didn't demand explanations, only trust. But the weight of Maddox's name lingered. Ethan turned away, shoulders sagging. "I can't lead this fight, not against him. You want to go after Maddox. You do it without me." Marcus's face hardened. He had depended on Ethan's strength for days, but now he saw the cracks running deep beneath the surface. He took a slow breath. "You think walking away will bring your men back? You think hiding in the woods is justice for what Maddox did?" Ethan's silence was answer enough. Marcus's voice rose, not in anger but in desperate conviction. "I don't need the Ethan who wants to disappear. I need the Ethan who taught me to move quiet, to fight smart, to survive when the odds are stacked. Shadow needs him too. And if you think for 1 second that Maddox deserves to breathe free while you hide up here, then you're not the man I thought you were." The words cut deep. Ethan flinched, not because Marcus was wrong, but because he was right. Still, Ethan turned away, his face hidden in shadow. "I need time," he muttered, voice rough. Marcus swallowed the frustration building in his chest. He gave a single nod. "Fine. Take your time. But don't take too long, because Maddox won't wait for us." He motioned to Shadow, and the dog followed as Marcus retreated a few steps into the trees, leaving Ethan standing alone in the cold. The forest pressed in around him, silent and suffocating. For the first time in years, Ethan Walker felt small in the face of his past. The darkness he thought he'd buried had come back to claim him, and this time he didn't know if he had the strength to fight it. The campfire burned low, crackling softly against the silence of the forest. Sparks drifted up into the cold night air, vanishing into a black sky heavy with clouds. The ridge, where they had discovered Maddox's stronghold, was less than a mile away, yet it felt like another world. Ethan sat on a fallen log, staring into the flames as though they could answer the questions clawing inside him. His face was drawn, shadowed by exhaustion and something deeper fear mixed with shame. Shadow lay at his feet, her head resting across his boots, breathing steady, a quiet reminder of presence and loyalty. Marcus had been pacing for nearly an hour, his boots crunching in the frost-hardened ground. He finally stopped, hands on his hips, and looked at Ethan with the blunt frustration of a soldier who refused to let another man drown. "You've been carrying this weight for years," Marcus said quietly, his voice low but edged. "But what Maddox did back then, that wasn't your fault." Ethan didn't look up. He tricked us, lied to us. I should have seen it coming. You couldn't. None of you could. You were betrayed by someone you trusted. That's on him, not you." Marcus moved closer, his tone sharpening. "You can't let that man keep living in your head. He already stole enough from you. Don't let him take the rest." Ethan's jaw clenched. The words struck hard, but part of him resisted, retreating into old wounds. The memories of fallen comrades, of radios crackling with lost breaths, weren't so easy to bury. "Justice doesn't bring them back," he muttered. Marcus crouched down, forcing Ethan to meet his eyes across the firelight. "No, it doesn't, but it stops him from making more graves. Think about all the kids, the families, the innocents he's destroying right now. If you walk away, their blood is on him and maybe on us too, because we had a chance to stop it." The fire popped, sending a small shower of sparks into the dark. Ethan inhaled sharply, shoulders trembling as though the night itself pressed down on him. Shadow stirred. Sensing his unease, she lifted her head and nudged at his hand with her nose, soft and insistent. When Ethan didn't react, she pressed harder, pawing gently at his leg before resting her chin across his knee. Her eyes, dark and steady, held no judgment, only patience. Ethan finally looked at her, the faintest crack forming in the wall he had built around himself. He reached down, fingers tangling in the thick fur of her neck. For a moment, his breathing slowed. Sinking with hers, Marcus softened his tone, watching the exchange. "You see, even she knows you're more than this guilt you keep feeding. You think Shadow followed you all this way because you're broken. No, she's with you because you're worth following. Because somewhere under all this pain, you're still the man who saves lives instead of walking away from them." The words landed like stones on Ethan's chest, heavy but undeniable. He wanted to argue, but Shadow's steady presence silenced him. She didn't need speeches. Her loyalty was its own truth. Ethan closed his eyes. Images of his fallen unit surfaced again, but this time, instead of blood and fire, he remembered their laughter, the inside jokes, the trust they had placed in one another. He realized Maddox hadn't just killed them, he had stolen their legacy, tainted the meaning of their sacrifice, and Ethan had let that theft define him for years. Slowly, he opened his eyes, the fire reflected in his gaze now, not as despair but as something fiercer resolve taking root. "You're right," he whispered. "Hiding hasn't healed me. It's only let Maddox keep winning." He looked down at Shadow, scratching behind her ears. They deserved better than that, and so does she. Shadow thumped her tail against the ground. As if sealing the vow, Marcus straightened, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Relief washed through him, though he tried to mask it behind his usual edge. "That's the Ethan Walker I've been waiting to hear from." Ethan pushed himself to his feet. Standing tall against the cold, he gazed toward the ridge, where faint lights from the enemy stronghold flickered through the trees. His face was calm now, not empty but sharpened with purpose. "This ends tomorrow," he said firmly. "No more running, no more ghosts." Marcus nodded, gripping his shoulder with the firm clasp of a comrade. "Then we hit them hard, and we don't stop until Maddox is finished." For the first time in years, Ethan felt a sense of clarity cutting through the fog. Not peace, he doubted he would ever truly find that, but direction. The path forward was dangerous, maybe suicidal, but it was also necessary. As the fire burned low, the two men began to plan quiet words, sketched maps in the dirt, whispered contingencies. Shadow lay close, ears pricked, her body poised as though she too understood what was coming. Above them, thunder rumbled far away, rolling through the mountains. A storm was building, not just in the sky but in their hearts. By morning, fire and chaos would consume the ridge. But for now, in the stillness of the night, Ethan Walker had made his choice. He would face the past, he would face Maddox, and this time, he would not fall. Dawn broke gray and cold over the Blackwood Range. The forest stood silent, branches weighed down by snow, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Hidden among the jagged rocks of the ravine, Ethan, Marcus, and Shadow waited. The narrow gorge ahead funneled into a choke point where the smugglers had to pass. It was the kind of terrain Ethan understood: neven ground, natural bottlenecks, places where traps spoke louder than bullets. He had spent the night planting snares, rigging and carving escape routes into the terrain. Marcus crouched beside him, rifle steady, every sense sharpened. Shadow paced in the snow behind them, ears pricked, her body tense with instinct. From the distance came the sound boots crunching, low voices carried by the wind, the occasional metallic rattle of weapons slung carelessly over shoulders. The gang was coming. Ethan signaled with 2 fingers. Silence tightened. The first wave of smugglers appeared between the pines, their outlines shifting through the mist. A dozen men, then more, Maddox's people were confident, moving like they owned the woods. They didn't know the woods belonged to Ethan now. The lead man stepped on a hidden snare. A whip of cable lashed his legs, dragging him sideways into the snow before the others could react. A deadfall of logs thundered down from the ridge, scattering the group and breaking their formation. Now, Ethan hissed. Marcus opened fire, precise bursts cracking through the morning air. Ethan joined him, rifle steady, shots clean and efficient. Shadow charged forward, snarling, her speed forcing two men into chaos as she lunged and snapped, driving them back toward the crossfire. The gorge erupted into chaos. Gunfire echoed off stone. Men shouted orders lost to panic, and the smell of gunpowder mixed with frost. Ethan moved like he was back in uniform, calm under fire. Every motion practiced. He didn't waste bullets. Every shot counted. A smuggler rushed Marcus's flank. Shadow intercepted, teeth sinking into the man's arm. He screamed, weapon dropping, before Marcus finished him with a single strike. Good girl, Marcus shouted, his voice hoarse with adrenaline. More men pressed in, pouring fire into the rocks. Ethan motioned Marcus back, then pulled a rope hidden at his side. Another trap snapped. Spiked branches swung down like the jaws of a beast, scattering the attackers. Snow exploded as the enemy dove for cover, but the fight wasn't one-sided. A bullet grazed Ethan's shoulder, the impact knocking him against the rocks. He grunted, teeth clenched, but forced himself back upright. Blood warmed his jacket, but he didn't falter. Shadow barked furiously, circling him like a shield. Marcus crawled closer, covering his side. You good? I'm fine, Ethan growled. His eyes stayed locked on the choke point. Keep pressure on them. We can't let them regroup. The enemy tried exactly that, forming a wedge to break through the gorge. Ethan anticipated it. He slid down the slope, landing hard in the snow, and lobbed a smoke grenade. White clouds swallowed the ravine, blinding the smugglers. Then he moved like a ghost. Out of the smoke came his rifle butt, a swift strike dropping one man. Another turn till Ethan's knife flashed, quick and brutal. Marcus covered from above, firing into the smoke whenever shapes shifted wrong. Left side. Ethan pivoted, firing point blank. The man collapsed. The gang's confidence fractured. Shouts turned desperate. Some fired blindly. Others broke ranks and fled deeper into the woods. But the gorge funneled them, and every path was already watched. Shadow gave chase, lunging after a runner, her teeth dragging him down into the snow. She didn't kill, just pinned him long enough for Marcus to finish the job. And then the last line of smugglers faltered. One of them stumbled on Ethan's final trap, a pit disguised under snow. He fell screaming, before the others froze in shock. Their hesitation sealed their fate. Ethan and Marcus surged together, a wall of fire and steel, driving the survivors into surrender. Breathless silence followed. The echo of gunfire faded, leaving only the groan of wind through the gorge. Snow settled over broken bodies. Red staining white Shadow stood panting, her muzzle flecked with frost and blood, eyes still bright with the heat of battle. Marcus lowered his rifle slowly, chest heaving, scanning the carnage. One man remained alive, pinned under Shadow, arms trembling in surrender. Ethan knelt, pressing the barrel of his rifle under the man's chin. Where's Maddox? Ethan demanded. The prisoner's eyes darted, fear raw and shaking. He's at the stronghold, North Ridge. He knew you might come. He's waiting. Ethan's jaw tightened, fury mixing with cold resolve. Maddox had planned for him. Of course he had. The man who had betrayed him once before was ready for the rematch. Marcus exchanged a look with him. Both knew what this meant. Today was only the beginning. Ethan stood, signaling Shadow to release. The man gasped for breath. Still alive but broken. Tie him, Ethan ordered. We'll use him later. Marcus obeyed. Ethan turned his eyes north, where the ridge loomed like a shadow against the morning sky. Snow still fell lightly, dusting his bloodied jacket, but he barely felt it. The Battle of Blackwood was won, but the war with Maddox had just begun. The stronghold on the North Ridge was nothing more than an abandoned logging camp, half-collapsed cabins, rusted swords, and a warehouse with its windows blacked out. But to Ethan, it felt like a battlefield already soaked with ghosts. He led Marcus and Shadow up the ridge, every step grinding in the snow. The closer they drew, the louder the pounding in his chest. This wasn't just about a mission. This was the day his past stopped hiding in the shadows. Inside the warehouse, the air was stale, heavy with oil and smoke. Crates of weapons lined the walls, and in the center, sitting with the arrogance of a man who believed he could not lose, was Cole Maddox. He hadn't changed much, older, scar running down his cheek, but the same cold grin that Ethan remembered. the grin of a man who sold his brothers for money and power. Well, Walker, Maddox drawled, leaning back in his chair. I was wondering how long it would take you to crawl out of your hole. Ethan froze for half a second. Hearing that voice again was like being dragged back into the desert, into the ruins, into the betrayal. He steadied his rifle, though his hands ached with tension. You killed them, Ethan said flatly. All of them. You walked us straight into hell. Maddox shrugged. Don't twist it, Ethan. I gave us a future. The government left us hanging. Scraps for pay and nothing for loyalty. I just made a better deal. Marcus from the side raised his weapon. A deal that cost lives. Maddox's eyes flicked to him, then to Shadow growling low by Ethan's side. He smirked. So this is your new family? A cop and a dog. You really traded down. The words hit hard, but Ethan didn't flinch. He had heard Maddox's poison before. He knew what it was meant to do, make him doubt, drag him into rage, weaken his resolve. I didn't come here to debate, Ethan said. His voice was like stone. This ends today. Maddox stood slowly, the chair scraping back. He drew a pistol from his belt, spinning it casually like he had nothing to fear. Then come on, soldier. Let's see if you've still got it. The first shot rang out like thunder. Maddox fired wide, forcing Ethan and Marcus to dive for cover behind a crate. Splinters sprayed as bullets chewed through wood. Shadow barked, snarling. Pressing close to Ethan's side, Ethan returned fire, clean and measured. Maddox was fast, ducking between stacks of crates, his laughter echoing through the warehouse. You always were predictable, Walker. Maddox taunted. Follow the rules. Play the hero. That's why they died. And you lived. The words twisted inside Ethan's chest, but Marcus's voice cut through. Don't listen to him. He wants you off balance. Ethan gritted his teeth. He had a choice. Let Maddox control the fight, or take it back. He signaled Marcus with a quick hand motion. Marcus nodded and shifted position, circling right to cut off Maddox's escape. Shadow stayed with Ethan, every muscle quivering like a coiled spring. The duel became closer. Roar of bullets traded at nearpoint. Crates exploded. Sparks lit the dark corners. Maddox rushed Ethan, tackling him against the wall. They collided hard, weapons skittering across the floor. Fists took over. Maddox's blows were brutal, years of violence carved into every strike. Ethan fought back with trained precision, blocking, countering, but Maddox's words never stopped. You left them to die, Ethan. You think I pulled the trigger? No, you froze. That's why they screamed your name, not mine. Rage surged. Ethan slammed Maddox back, fists hammering, but in the swirl of fury, he felt it, that edge of doubt Maddox had planted years ago, still festering. A bark shattered the spiral. Shadow lunged, sinking teeth into Maddox's arm. He roared, wrenching away, giving Ethan the opening. Marcus stormed in, striking Maddox across the jaw with the butt of his rifle, but Maddox wasn't finished. He staggered, grabbed a fallen pistol, and aimed straight at Marcus. Ethan didn't think. Training, instinct, loyalty, all of it fused into one motion. He drew his sidearm, raised it, and fired. The shot cut through the warehouse. Sharp and final. Maddox's body jerked, his eyes wide with shock. For a moment, the grin faltered, and Ethan saw not a monster but a man who had chosen greed over brotherhood. Then Maddox collapsed, the pistol clattering from his hand. Silence settled heavy, broken only by Ethan's ragged breathing. Marcus lowered his rifle, staring at the body. It's over. Ethan didn't answer right away. His hands trembled as the weight of years pressed down, then lifted all at once. The ghost of Maddox, the betrayal, the voices of fallen brothers. It wasn't gone, but it was finished. Shadow pressed against his leg, grounding him in the present. Marcus stepped closer, steady and firm. You didn't freeze this time. You ended it. Ethan closed his eyes, letting the truth sink in. He had faced the traitor, faced the past, and for the first time in years, the storm inside him began to quiet.
The fight was over. The echo of gunfire had faded into memory, replaced by the steady hum of helicopters overhead and the crunch of boots as federal agents swarmed the ridge. The rest of Maddox's gang had been captured, bound in the snow like broken shadows of the empire they thought they controlled. Marcus stood at the edge of the clearing, radio pressed to his ear, reporting in. His voice was steady but weary. For him, the mission was complete, evidence secured, suspects in custody, justice finally delivered. Ethan lingered apart, leaning against a pine tree blackened by years of storms. His shoulder ached from the fight, his knuckles roared, but it wasn't the pain that weighed on him. It was the strange, hollow quiet that comes when a battle ends, when the ghosts you've carried for years finally fall silent. Shadow padded over, tail low but wagging faintly, and pressed her head against his thigh. Ethan's hand dropped instinctively, fingers brushing through her thick fur. For a long moment he just stood there, letting the dog's warmth remind him that he wasn't alone, not anymore. Marcus walked back, exhaustion in his step but triumph in his eyes. Commands on their way. They'll clean this up. He studied Ethan, then gave a small nod. We couldn't have done this without you. Ethan didn't answer right away. Praise wasn't something he knew how to wear. Instead, he glanced out toward the mountains. The horizon still dark but beginning to soften with the first hints of light. I almost walked away, he admitted quietly. If it weren't for you, and his hand rested on Shadow's head, I would have. Marcus smiled, tired but genuine. Then maybe that's the point. Sometimes we need people to remind us who we are. Ethan exhaled slowly, the air steaming in the dawn chill. He thought about his cabin, the quiet woods, the life he had tried to build away from everything. But now he saw it differently. Solitude wasn't peace, it was running. And for the first time in years, he wasn't running anymore. As the agents loaded the prisoners onto transport vehicles, Marcus turned back to Ethan. I'll write you into my report. They'll want to commend you. Ethan shook his head. No reports, no medals. That part of my life is gone. He paused, then added, softer, but thank you. Marcus didn't press. He understood. Some men didn't need their names and records. They just needed to know they had stood where it mattered. Shadow barked once, sharp and clear as if punctuating the moment. She trotted a few steps toward Ethan's side and sat firmly, her body language leaving no room for debate. She had made her choice. Marcus chuckled. Looks like she's picked a home. Ethan crouched, meeting the dog's eyes. Loyal, steady, unflinching. He felt a pull in his chest he hadn't known for years. Can I trust? The promise of something more than survival. Then I guess I'm not as alone as I thought, he said softly. By the time the sun breached the horizon, the Blackwood Ridge was bathed in gold. Snow glittered like fire on the branches, and the jagged peaks glowed against the sky. Ethan stood with Marcus and Shadow, watching as the light spread, chasing away the last of the night. For Marcus, it was victory. For Shadow, instinct. For Ethan, it was something deep and the fragile but undeniable sense of a future. The war inside him wasn't erased. Ghosts never truly left. But in that moment, with the sun rising over the mountains and Shadow pressed against his side, Ethan Walker felt something he hadn't in years: peace. And as the first full light of morning touched his face, he let it in.